Good morning and welcome to Connecticut PTAC's webinar series. Today's presentation is titled NIST 800-171 Best Practices Framework and is presented by Ari Santiago, CEO and President of IT Direct, a Hartford-based technology services firm that helps businesses harness the power of technology to achieve their business goals. The company has been awarded honors such as Inc. magazine's annual list of America's 5,000 fastest-growing privately held companies, Mentor's Top 200 in North America and Top 501 worldwide lists for the best managed service providers, Ingram Micro SMB 500, the Top 500 small and medium business-focused solution providers, Markham Tech Top 40 for Top 40 fastest-growing IT companies in Connecticut, and Inc. magazine's 50 best workplaces. I will now turn the program over to Ari. Thank you, Ari.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate it. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Today we're going to spend some time talking about NIST compliance and cybersecurity. So we'll kind of get started. Lisa, thanks so much for the intro. This is a brief I'll give myself a brief little intro. This is a picture about half of our organization. As Lisa mentioned, we're based in Hartford, and we spend all of our time working on IT infrastructure. I personally have been working in the IT infrastructure space since the 90s. So for any of you guys who remember Lantastic or Microsoft DOS, those are my roots. And I've really seen, and we've seen as an organization, security grow and develop as a real focus over the number of years. IT, for those of you that have been working in IT, will know security was never a core focus of the IT infrastructure when it was originally designed. In fact, IT was initially designed in an open platform model, so quite the opposite of any of a security infrastructure. But over time, as more and more critical pieces of information and more corporate data has been saved, and combined that with people wanting to get that data, security has become an ever-increasing concern. Started out primarily in the private sector, right, thinking about how to protect organizational interests, and has moved beyond that. And so IT Direct has taken an active role working with organizations on how to manage their networks. And because of the growth in security focus, we've kind of grown and done that as well. So we're purely an infrastructure-focused company and work with people to help make their infrastructure work better, including security. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. So what I'd like to do in the time that we have together is really go over NIST. What is NIST? What is the 800-171? Why are we asked to follow it? And then from there, just talk a little bit about the state of cybercrime. In my view, NIST, and we'll talk about this as we go through this, NIST is really a compilation of what I would consider to be IT best practices, right? I know it's long and it's convoluted, or not enough convoluted, but certainly it's long and in some ways complicated. It has a lot of components and then subcomponents and subcomponents of those components. So it's a lot to deal with. But the reality is that NIST is really just combining, I think, what we would say are best practices. And what's driving that and the protection of that really is the growth in cybercrime. So I think it's important, after we go over the overview, to talk about the current state of cybercrime, which I think drives home the point of why NIST is critically important, not just because it's something that we need to do if we want to be involved in working on government projects, but also really best practices for our organizations in general. So we'll talk about state of cybercrime. Then I'm going to spend brief time talking about what we consider to be the three basic components or tenants of good cybersecurity. And then we'll go into the NIST requirements and the 14 families, and I'll sort of indicate how those tie back to the basic tenants, and really give an overview of each of the 14 families, what they're looking for, and what's important about them. When we're done with that, we'll be able to do a little Q&A. So let's talk about NIST. So what is NIST? So NIST itself is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's actually a government agency, a non-regulatory government agency that helps to develop, as it would say, standards in technology. It's actually a part of the United States Department of Commerce, and it's been around for over 100 years. And so really what NIST does is it helps develop standards that then get published and are really can be used for people in various industries and organizations to help kind of have a best practice guideline. And so that's really NIST's role in general, and sometimes gets used by the government to help develop standards that are then published and required. And so that kind of dovetails nicely into what is NIST 800-171. So NIST 800-171 actually goes all the way back to 2010. At that time, President Obama released an executive order that was really looking at how to additionally protect what's called CUI, or controlled unclassified information. There have been controls, as you might imagine, for classified information for some time, but there really became a need and an understanding that we needed to go beyond just protecting what was quote unquote classified and what was more, say, controlled information, important information, in particular as it relates to the defense industrial complex that may not be classified, but could be deemed to be extremely important. And as I alluded to earlier, more and more, and as I'm sure you know from your own organizations, more and more data is being stored on IT systems. Design documents, emails, communications, all those things are growing and proliferating much more every single year, right? It's growing at an exponential pace. And so the government realized that there was high value in this controlled information that wasn't, say, strictly classified. And so what they wanted to do was create a framework that says, hey, we want to make sure that this information is being protected because that information, quite honestly, has some value. And so when it has value, people are going to want to get it. And I think that leads into why the government wants us to be NIST compliant, right? Because what they've realized is that this digital information that could be design, drawings, specifications, comments about those specifications related to any number of government defense programs would be stuff that bad actors could have access to, not through going through DoD, but going through any of the primes or the subs to the primes or the subs to the subs of the primes that would have really critically important information that would have monetary value, that could be sold to foreign countries, foreign governments, foreign bad actors, even internal United States bad actors, that has real monetary value. And where there's monetary value and an ability to get it, there's bound to be crime that follows behind. And so the government wanted to say, hey, let's make sure we're protecting that. And so let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. So I mentioned that there's value in this, and here comes the crime right behind it. So let's talk about the state of cybercrime, because I think it's important to have a context of what cybercrime looks like today to understand the importance of the protection of CUI. And really, quite honestly, I think the importance of following NIST. I mean, we talk to our clients who don't even have CUI, or if they have CUI in one part of their business, but say not the other part, what the importance of really implementing NIST as a guideline and a framework for just cybersecurity best practices. And I think understanding the threats and the risk is critical to understanding that. So let's go through that a little bit. So first thing is, let's talk a little bit about what's been in the news, right? So if you're alive and you see and you read things, you probably have no surprise to you that there's been a wild increase in the amount of breaches and cybercrime that's just happening, and it's making it into the mainstream news. And so I just went and picked some stuff that's really quite recent that's happened, that's just related to sort of consumer-based stuff, because that's what's generally being reported in the news. But you can see that just since March of this year, we're looking at millions of users, millions of credit cards just being exposed on all kinds of stuff. And it's not just happening to the retail stuff, Panera Bread, Home Depot, Target, Lowe's, but even IT companies, Cisco networks have been having issues with their switches. So I mean, there's a lot going on here that's impacting all different types of companies all across the board, and we need to be aware of that. Also, some just general statistics, right? So first thing is, I like to point out that 73% of data breaches were done by hackers versus internal resources. And I like to bring that up because I think that there's been some information or some thought process sort of in the zeitgeist, if you will, that really talks about the fact that, hey, this hacker concept isn't a big deal. It's really, we need to be concerned about our internal people and what they're doing. And while I think that we do need to be concerned about internal resources, there's really been a massive increase where we're looking at almost 3/4 of data breaches are being done. This is 2018 data looking at 2017 breaches, were really done by hackers. And that's an increasing amount. And we really need to look at making sure that we're doing things to protect against that. And the reason that that's also important is because hackers will be much more sophisticated than our own internal resources about how they get in. So if they're increasing their sophistication, we need to make sure that we're increasing our internal due diligence to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. 68% of breaches took months or longer to discover. That is an enormous problem. It's a problem that we actually see here, where we've gotten calls that people ask us to come and look at stuff. Something's not acting right on their network, or in one case, we were called in to address one particular breach. And when we were investigating that, we found out there was another breach that had been inside their system for over 6 months. This is a real problem, because if someone can come in and kind of create a beachhead inside your organization and stay there undetected for long periods of time, the amount of damage that they can do just is exponential. And so it's important, I think, to keep a mind on that. And that's why I think there's some parts of NIST that talk about not just protection, but also detection. And so we'll get into that and why that detection is so important. No surprise, I'm sure, to anybody that 76% of breaches are financially motivated, right? Looking to get after the money. 13% of breaches motivated by gain of strategic advantage. So certainly espionage is a problem. We've read about, I think, some stuff in the news you may have heard about from China stealing our technologies, but that number is growing, right? The amount of stuff that's being done to actually steal industrial information that can then be used, that's a real problem that we need to be considered thinking about when we're putting together our protections, and why those protections are important. If we have to make a case, it's going to take some time, some effort, and some money and systems to get our security where it needs to be. So I think it's important to understand, hey, we're doing this for a reason, and understanding what the ROI is and what we're protecting against is critically important. And finally, U.S. Cybercrime Survey discovered that 77%, again, over 3/4 of companies reported having some type of a security event or breach in the preceding 12 months. So this is not chicken little, sky is falling. This is real. Things are happening, and we need to take action and make sure that we're not one of those negative statistics. So let's talk about what's happening. So here's a SonicWall, which is a cybersecurity provider who's been looking at what's been detected in terms of global malware detected on networks. And I think it's important to note that the amount of malware is increasing at an enormous rate. So this just showing 2017 versus 2018. I point out that 2017 was double the activity in 2016, which actually 16 was a bit of a low year, but double the 2016 and 2017. And as you can see here, we're more than doubling again between 17 and 18, right? So this is malware being detected across the internet globally. It's a huge influx, and it's only increasing. Part of that increase, we'll talk about in a little bit, is the easy access to general malware. I specifically like to talk about ransomware because I think that's been something that's been very popular in the news. For those of you that don't know, ransomware is where the bad actor, gets software onto your system. And what that software does is it actually takes your data, it encrypts it, and then prevents you from accessing it unless you pay them. And ransomware, as you can see, is growing at a very fast rate, in part because it works, and in part because access to the malware is becoming easier and easier. This is very easily protected against if you have your ducks in a row, but unfortunately there's been a number of public cases, including the entire city of Atlanta, that did not have their ducks in a row. And when you don't, this can cause significant problems. If you don't have current backups, this can send your business into a complete disarray. And there's any number of places that have had this problem happen, from large medical facilities. I mentioned the city of Atlanta. And there's no guarantee that when you pay them, that they will give you the codes to unlock it. What they do is they make you pay the ransom in Bitcoin, which in and of itself can be a challenge to get. And they do pay, but I think a statistic I most recently saw was they pay in 80% of cases, which is no consolation if you're in the 20%. So again, easily protected against if we have our ducks in a row. And one more reason it's important to make sure we're looking at this NIST framework and executing on that in our planning. And finally, I wanted to talk really briefly about global encrypted cyber attacks. So what is a global encrypted cyber attack? So an encrypted cyber attack is when the malware gets transmitted over an encrypted tunnel. So for any IT folks on the phone, if they're on the webinar, there's an increasing amount of malware, as you can see here, that's coming through encrypted sources, through either SSL tunnels or through TLS encryption tunnels. And why that poses a big risk is that if we haven't done an effective risk analysis to say, where could malware be coming from and can our systems detect it, there is a lot of legacy equipment and systems that are unable to scan for malware or don't scan for malware within encrypted traffic, right? So there is an assumption in previous years that, hey, if it's encrypted, it must be good. But over time, to protect public information, the use of encrypted traffic has increased to the point where most of the websites we go to are SSL encrypted. Well, if someone plants some malware on a website, it can transmit through that tunnel. And if our tools aren't sophisticated enough to be able to scan and detect within that encrypted data transfer, then we're going to be exposed to a significant cyber threat. And so I think this is just one example of the ever increasing cyber threat that's out there and why it's so critical to make sure that we're taking the steps we need to take to do our appropriate risk assessments and follow the NIST protocols. So let's talk a little bit about why is this increasing, right? Why I went through why we're seeing this massive increase in malware and all that means. So why is that growing and how is that so effective? Well, cybercrime is run like a business. And what I'm showing here is a dark web job board called IT Monsters. And what you can do on here is you can go on here and you can find a job to become a hacker. And you'll see here, this is a little translation that's in here, but it's essentially a job vacancy for a Java Flash specialist on a Ukrainian website. And this is looking for somebody who's got skills in Java and Flash. It's a remote work job, right? It's a work at home job with full employment, $2,500 salary. And if you go through these, I mean, some of these things will even offer you benefits, paid time off. I mean, they're running it, like I said, just like a business. And so there's ample opportunity for them to find talent, especially in the foreign countries, Eastern Europe and Asia, and they build up this talent, and this is the level of sophistication they're using to try and get into our systems. So we better make sure that we're putting in the time it takes to protect against that. Another thing we're looking at here, this is another site. This is something where they're advertising for a beta testing of an affiliate program to distribute ransomware. So what's an affiliate program? So an affiliate program is where someone can go out and say get some very minor malware that they'll put on a site that people might go to. Sometimes it's on sites that we would expect, like pornographic sites. Other times it's just on regular basic sites that you would have no idea about. And so what happens is these people will get control of people's home computers, and then they will sell access to that home computer where you can then distribute the malware from the computers that you now control. Why would that be important? Well, if we notice that there's a lot of bad traffic, say, coming from Eastern Europe or China or Asia, if we don't do business in those areas, we can prevent all the traffic from those geographic locations and shut them down. So what these people have realized is, hey, if I can get control of computers, say in the United States, and I can get control of 1,000 home computers, and then I can launch my attacks from those computers, that's A, much harder to track where it's coming from, B, prevents anyone from being able to block us by a geographic region, and allows us, and the third thing it allows us to do is get a lot more computing horsepower without actually having to buy the computers, because I'm just going to steal that from unsuspecting people. And so at any given time, there are tens of thousands of computers, maybe hundreds of thousands of computers all over the United States that are compromised that the owners don't even know about. And that's probably no surprise to anybody who's sort of familiar with that. But this is the level of sophistication that most people I don't think are aware of, that I think it's important to really understand the landscape of what we're dealing with. And finally, I think it's important to discuss, well, what do people do with this data? So if I get this data, how can I monetize it, right? Because the data may have some value, but it only has value if I can turn it into money. Well, that's also pretty easy, and this is an example of a place where you could do it, something called Alpha Bay Market, where you can actually go on and you can sell your data that you would steal from folks. And in addition to that, you can actually buy malware. And so this example right here is showing the ability for someone to buy a Trojan, a malware piece that they could buy for just under $3,000 in Bitcoin, of course, that they can then download and they can get and use on their own. And I think this is part of the reason that we've seen such an increase in malware and cybercrime over time, because now you don't have to be a coder. You don't even have to hire a coder. You can just go online and buy the malware that you need. There's instructions on how to do it. In fact, there's something called malware as a service where you actually can pay a monthly subscription and they'll send you updates, so that when the malware gets blocked by antivirus or other packages, if they release an update, you can actually get that update and get that applied so that you can use it and get your stuff even better. This is an example here on that same market of selling, here's the United States, full access, social security number, DOB, right? So selling personal information. And this is just another example, just to show the sophistication, the level where people can go on here and just like you would see on eBay or Amazon or any other site, here's the rating of the seller, how well they're doing. So the level of sophistication and the ease at which people can monetize this information is at a level I think most people don't fully understand. And as a result, I just want to make sure we understand that so that we know what we have to do to protect against it. So let's talk a little bit about the three basic tenets of cybersecurity. So broadly speaking, the three tenets we have are, number one is protect, right? So we want to make sure that we're doing the things we need to do to protect our network. And this is, I think, the most obvious and what people often think about. And it's everything, right? We'll get into it in detail in the NIST, but it's everything from training to antivirus software to best practices and passwords to, making sure that the people have the right amount of security and so on and so forth. So protection obviously is key, and there's any number of things that we'll get into that talk about protection, and it's a critical component. But the next component beyond protection is detection. I'll mention a number of times as we go through today, but the reality is that the goal of protecting ourselves 100% from any cyber incident or cyber breach is really foolhardy. It's just not possible. And so we need to make sure that we're not just focused on the wall that keeps people out, but we're also focused on the systems that tries to find out when they get in so that we can stop them as quickly as possible. I mentioned earlier that we find people that have been inside of systems for 6 months or longer. And so we want to make sure that we're not one of those people that if a breach does occur, that we find out about it and we lock it down and do what we need to do, which leads into the final tenet, which is recover. So we can't just think about how do we protect. We can't just think about how we detect. We have to realize that once we detect, we need to be able to recover. And so protection, detection, and recovery are really the three broad strokes that we need to be thinking about with any level of cybersecurity. And as we go through the 14 families of NIST requirements, I'm going to sort of dovetail those, and I've reordered them. So if you know the NIST framework, they're not going to be in order, but I've ordered them so that they're in the protect, detect, and recover. It's because I think it's important to understand that that's really the overall framework, and that's how you can see NIST really dovetails into just what would be cybersecurity best practices. So let's talk about the 14 families of NIST requirements, the what and the why of what they are. So starting in our protect area, the first family we'll talk about is access control. So access control, if you look inside the NIST framework, that one family has within it 22 individually listed controls. And if you actually dig deeper within those 22 controls, there's actually 83 different methodologies that you should be looking at to address those requirements. So this is one of the bigger sections within the NIST framework. And what we need to be thinking about within our access control systems is, number one, and most importantly, is the principle of least privileged access. Least privileged access. That is really the key thing to be thinking about when you're talking about access control. And least privileged access is exactly what you might think it is from the words. It's people should be having the least amount of privileged access, the least amount of access to data and systems that they need to get their job done. That allows us to control in the most effective way the surface area that we have to deal with, right? So if people don't need to have access to certain things to get their job done, then let's not give them that access, which just limits the number of potential breach avenues that someone could get into. And so when we're thinking about how do we address access control, it's really critical to run through workflow. So when we work with clients, a lot of times what we do is literally flow out and map in where does important data come from? And in the NIST concept, if we're just really focused on NIST, we want to say, where do we get our controlled unclassified information? Where does that CUI come in? And so that may start by saying, okay, what information do we collect? And then is that information CUI or non-CUI? And then if it is CUI, how is it transmitted to us? How do we get it? Is it uploaded? Do we collect it on paper and then scan it? And if we do scan it, do we scan to email? And then does that email leave us or come back? We need to be thinking about that. And that's why I think a workflow way of doing it is really the best way. And then once we have it, how is it transmitted internally, person to person? How is it going? Do we email it? Do we upload it? If we have multiple sites, how are we getting it from one site to another site? So thinking about those transmission paths, and are those transmission paths encrypted, right? Do any of those transmission paths leave our sort of controlled network because our email is hosted in the cloud or our FTP site is hosted in the cloud, right? And then the next thing to thinking about is, where is the data stored? What server is it on? If someone gets it on a piece of paper and they scan it, do they also save a copy local on their computer? Is that computer mobile? Do we have encryption on that computer, right? What are we doing about that? So thinking about where that's stored and how that works, right? Within the workflow context of how the data is operating. And then what else are we thinking about in terms of who has access to this data? So at each step along the process, right? So if we're following our workflow and we see where the data comes in and who it goes to and what they do with it and where it might be stored or modified and then maybe resent out. So during all these steps, who has access to the data? How is it being protected? And then do those people need access at each one of these steps? And really kind of limiting it back to make sure that we just have, again, that least privileged access to just who actually needs it, right? How are we making sure that the people who have the access are who we think they are? Does everyone have a unique login, right? That's going to be critically important. Do we have the right security for remote access in place, right? Who's been assigned administrator rights on our network, partial or full administrator rights? That's a critical component that we're looking at in access control. What about physical security? You know, NIST doesn't just address technical stuff. It all, you know, IT specific stuff, just systems and user accounts and passwords. You know, it also addresses the physical security. So are we protecting the physical security with access to these items? By the way, both printed on paper as well as key access to the systems, right? As most IT people know, if I can get access to your server closet, I'll be able to hack your data. So do we have physical security controls to make sure that our server rooms and also where all of our network switches are those locked to make sure that we have the physical security that we need? And finally, do we have the access control system and processes and management standards to keep all of this up to date as we go forward? Access control is a big part of the NIST framework. Next family talk about is a much briefer one, awareness and training. That's only 3 controls, and we look at about 8 methods to address those requirements within those 3 controls. And while this is short, I think that training and awareness is really an undervalued and critically important part of any good cybersecurity strategy and framework. Our users are generally the weakest link in our security, and that's why there's been such an increase in social engineering and spear phishing and whaling. You probably heard of those terms, where people try and go after users and convince them to do things that would allow someone to gain access, or in some cases send their password out that has someone then use that to gain access subsequently. And so awareness and training is critically important. Historically, we've seen people rely on the when you get hired training and then the once a year, in-service security reminder training. I think we're beyond that at this point. There's a number of systems that are out there that can automate training on a much more regular basis that will do some phishing testing and reporting, and really provide monthly reminders and key pieces of information. We've had some clients that put information, bulletin board information in the break room, in the lunchroom that rotates on a quarterly basis to kind of keep it front of mind, because the best protection and the best awareness and training that you can give your users is regular reminders. In our experience, it's very rare that someone does these things intentionally, but what often happens is people forget. They've got their job, they're moving at a quick pace, and they see something that looks like a reminder that there's a FedEx package that's delayed, and because that's what they just do every day, they click on it. When it asks for username and password, or it says, hey, you need to download and run this app, they just click yes without thinking that, hey, this isn't how this normally works, or I'm not even expecting a FedEx package or anything like that. So our best protection against that is really regular and ongoing awareness to keep it front of mind. And there's really low cost ways to do that on a regular basis. So we think those are definitely worth looking at and really important as you go through your NIST preparations. Configuration management, that is another part of protection, right? So this particular family has 9 controls, and we've identified 35 methods within those 9 controls to address configuration management. Some of that is easier. If you are writing software internally, if you're an organization that happens to write your own custom software, then you've got a little bit more work to do on configuration management, especially if you're storing or transmitting or manipulating CUI in that custom software. But for many folks that are just really, have their own IT infrastructure, of course, and are using purchased software, it's a little bit easier because the companies you buy it from will do a lot of the configuration management and documentation for you. But you need to keep an eye on what the configurations are doing and what you have going on your systems, right? So one critical component of this is making sure you know what is on your network, right? Keeping an eye on what is plugged in and what's accessible on and from your network. And I think this is an important thing that is often overlooked about how we maintain what is on our key and important networks. And I think that there's an instructive lesson we can all learn here from the Target data breach. And I know that data breach is at this point a couple of years old, but a lot of us, I'm sure, remember it was one of the first big data breaches that kind of really captured what I would sort of consider the lay people's information. I remember seeing it on sort of the 6 o'clock news, which is not something that was very typical at the time, and it really became a big story because of how much data was stolen. And when you dig into that, the core of that breach was really a hack that happened through their HVAC system. And so that begs the question, what was the HVAC system doing on the same network as the credit card processing system that would allow someone to start stealing people's credit card information because they were able to get into the heating and air conditioning system? And I think that really boils down to, no one's actually there to know 100%, but I think what that really boils down to is just a lack of control of what's being plugged into and connected to each network. What are we doing to segment the networks so that we don't have certain systems that are accessed by service companies that come from outside that we don't control, that's on the same network where our CUI might be? What are we doing to protect against that? We've also seen things where employees want additional wireless coverage, and they literally bring in wireless access points from home, plug those into the network, and create their own little wireless network. And in many cases, they're not even thinking that this is a big deal. Maybe they're thinking it saves the company money, or they're just saving the IT department time, or what have you. But that can create a massive security risk. So what are we doing to make sure that we have our system set up in such a way that we can detect unauthorized wireless access points, right? Do we have systems in place? Many of the network switches these days will allow us to set it up to make sure that there's only one device plugged into every network port. Are we doing that? Are we thinking about the need for that? So these are critically important items to be thinking about. And just having a solid inventory of what we have on the network, what's in play, and making sure that what we have is needed, and disabling what is not needed. And that goes beyond just, say, generally do we need this device or this piece of equipment, yes or no, but also within the systems, right? So if we have an email server on our network, do we need all the features open, all the data ports open, right? So it's just going through, getting an inventory of what's on and what's there, and just making sure that if we're not using it, let's turn it off. Let's just close down that potential hole that somebody might be able to exploit to get into our network. To me, this is really a typical IT best practice and a great example of, I think, where NIST is just encouraging us to do the things that we really should be doing anyway. Identification and authentication. There's 11 controls inside this family, and we've identified 25 methods that we should be looking at to address this requirement. And this is a big part of NIST on making sure that activity on a network can be identified and traced back to the actual user that's doing it, right? So there is a general focus you can sort of see within the whole NIST framework about making sure we know who's accessing the data and what they're doing with it overall. And so what does that mean and how are we doing that? So, in this case, we don't want to have shared passwords, right? We don't want to have accounts that are shared between people. We want to make sure that if there's service accounts, right, an account that the technology itself, the servers or the system uses to do things, that's not also an account that a person is using, right? That would not be appropriate, right? We want to have different stuff. And if we have IT administrators, we want to make sure that the accounts they use to administrate the network and make changes and run systems is not the same account that they're using to do their day-to-day work, respond to emails, and sort of do their basic tasks, right? They should have two separate and distinct accounts that are not the same, so that we really limit that accessibility in that platform. And are we thinking about multi-factor authentication? Right, that's going to come up a little bit better, but certainly we need to do that. And also from an identification and authentication standpoint, are we using some password best practices, right? Do we have a minimum length of password? Are we ensuring that people can't have the password? Do we have a lockout so that if someone doesn't put in their password right, say 5 or 10 times, that the system locks them out, right? That avoids someone using what's called a brute force, where they just try, have a computer try 1 million passwords till they hack it. And are we preventing people from reusing the same password if we make them change it over and over again? So just going through again, best practices, making sure that they're there, a critical component of this identification and authentication standpoint. Maintenance. So our maintenance section, 6 controls and 21 methods within that. And maintenance is literally, there's actually in the beginning of this family, it literally says perform maintenance on organizational systems. I think that that's pretty obvious. Hopefully we all realize that our systems need maintenance. So we want to make sure that we're putting in the time to maintain those. And we have the proper tools and we're giving folks what they need to maintain and keep their systems going. So that's really important. And we want to make sure from a CUI standpoint, do we have the processes in place to make sure that we're disposing of our equipment, making sure that we've got multi-factor authentication for non-local maintenance sessions from external networks, right? So if we have people that are outside of our organization that are coming in to do maintenance, are we making sure that they have a multi-factor authentication so that we can ensure that people that we've entrusted to have administrative or elevated rights to our network, that they are who they say they are and that they're really elevated to do what they need to do? That's critically important. Excuse me there. Going the wrong way. All right. Media protection. So we just need to make sure that we're protecting our media. So this is, by the way, again, NIST is not just about digital, it's also about physical. So do we have the protection of our media, our digital media? Are we making sure like that the media is encrypted as it needs to be? Are we making sure that the people that have access to it is who needs to have access to it, both electronically and physical access to our various important storage media? Are we protecting anything that's mobile, that's encrypted, and making sure that any information is limited to what's leaving the network and we know where it is and what it's stored on? And also physical. So if we've got any CUI that's on paper, are we protecting that and making sure that that's covered and protected is an important part of that family. And then there's restricted areas, so personnel security here. So 2 controls within this, kind of small, but this is a non-technical control, right? It's not IT specific, but it really is focused in on our HR hiring processes. Are we screening people before we start? Hopefully we're all doing that. Make sure that they, if they can pass an appropriate background check. And do we have appropriate HR processes so that when people are terminated or their employment changes, that gets filtered to IT so that their access control changes. And I think that there's one important thing to note on this one is that, a lot of people think about employee termination. So if someone leaves, are we making sure that people know that they've left? And that's certainly important. We don't want to forget about that. But another thing we need to think about is job role changes or department transfers. So within larger organizations or even smaller organizations, if somebody switches a job role or switches the department they're in, does that change the CUI or the data that they might need to have access to? And if it does, we want to make sure that we have those changes made so that, again, we're following that least privileged access principle and getting people to have only the access controls that they absolutely need to keep our attack surface area as small and compact as possible. Are we doing periodic group membership reviews to make sure that this is actually being implemented, right? So that's a really good thing to do on a regular basis, sort of look at who's in what security groups, make sure that that's appropriate. And another good tip here, we got two actually more good tips. One is, I know a lot of times people leave an organization and we want to keep their email active. So you want to make sure that when we do that, we have a process in place that keeps their email alive, but doesn't allow them to continue to have access, right? There are very, very easy ways to do that, but we just want to make sure that those are being done. And finally, want to make sure that when people are leaving, we've got a solid checklist to make sure that everything's being followed, not just on all the IT systems being removed, because listen, in many places, you might have 4 or 5 different accounts to 4 or 5 different things. So if we don't have integration to single sign-on in one place, we want to make sure that we know all the different places we have to go and disable a user or change their password so that they don't have access would be absolutely critical. And other things that we may not think of, are we disabling their key cards, right? If they have email on mobile devices, do we have verifiable removal of that email and content, before they leave? So that'd be an important part of this part of NIST and getting that documented. Physical protections, this is, again, non-real IT area. There's only 6 controls and 21 methods in here, but it's really all about logging access. So I'd say pretty straightforward, but one kind of real I think nuance in here that's not always thought about is a lot of people have kind of the log book at the front of their facility. When you come in, you have to identify yourself and sort of log your access. But in NIST, when it comes down to logging access, we need to go beyond just logging access to the facility, but also logging access to our IT closets and server rooms in particular. So an additional log there, I think, is critically important to making sure that we know who's going in there, and are we limiting that access? Again, least privileged access. So let's make sure that if people have a key, if it's a physical key and we have to have a written log, that's one way to do it. Obviously, ideally, there would be a key card access that would be limited, that would automatically kind of identify who was going in and out, and then we would just have a paper log if there was any type of maintenance. And do we have a process in place to make sure that if there's people who are doing, say, HVAC maintenance in our server room, that they're being properly escorted through the facility. So again, a non-IT thing, but critically important. Physical security and security assessments. So there's 4 controls and 10 methods in here to just making sure that we're doing an appropriate security assessment. So obviously we need to do a larger assessment just to get our NIST completed in the first place, but are we doing a periodic review of our security protocols and plans? And then if we find something that's not quite right, let's develop a plan to correct those deficiencies and document that, right? We need to monitor our controls and making sure that they are being used, right? Are we actually doing the things that we say that we're doing? How many of us have an employee handbook that hasn't been reviewed or modified or edited in years, right? That may say things that aren't actually true. I mean, the reality is that when it comes down to NIST, there isn't really a very strong framework right now to go around and audit or ensure compliance. But what we are pretty convinced is going to happen is 2 things. Well, number one, as I've said numerous times before, and I'll continue to say, I'm sure, a few more times before this is over, this is really a framework of best practice that we really believe companies should be doing just in their own basic self-interest, to just have strong best practices to protect their corporate interests. But if something were to go wrong and there was some type of a breach that came down and the government discovered it, and it was traced back to the contract that you're working on, and they come in, the first thing they're going to want to see is, what have you done with NIST? Where's your security plan? Where are your regular reviews? What have you been doing? And then subsequent to that, are you following the procedures and policies that you wrote down? And so for us, it's critically important. Look, the hard work is going to be the first time, right? Going through it, putting together the original plan. And once that's done, the review is generally quite easy. So let's make sure that we are doing that review. I give one example. Last year, we were helping someone out doing cybersecurity assessment and review and helping them kind of with some NIST. And we found that they had a written policy, but when you look at their policy, you'll realize hadn't been updated in a long time because it was still talking about floppy disks and how to get email on your Palm Pilot. No one in that organization had used a Palm Pilot in a decade, right? So, I mean, and it spoke nothing about the newer technology, iPhones, or any of the different stuff that really was happening. So, I mean, you flip through these pages and you immediately can see out of date, not anything that's really current and being followed through on. So that's really important. Let's make sure that we're doing that. And the last thing I would say is you are creating your own standard by which you're going to be measured. You're creating your own standard by which you're going to be measured. So let's make sure we make the standard something we're willing to adhere to. So if we're going to write something down, let's make sure it's something that we're going to be committed to and that we're actually going to execute on. And if we're not, then let's not say it. We don't need to make this thing longer than it needs to be. So, you know, our belief at IT Direct is that simplicity is king. So let's do what we need to do, but not more than that, right? Let's take a lean approach to how we're executing on NIST to take care of what we need to, but not overcommit, right? So if we're going to write in this that if someone does something, they're going to be terminated, then let's make sure that that's really what we want to do. Or if we're going to review a log at an X period of time, let's make sure that that's actually what we're going to do. Because when push comes to shove, that's what we're going to be measured by. So let's not overcommit to something that we don't need to. And it's also important that that's why we do a regular review, because sometimes we think something's important and a year later we look at it and say, you know, we're really not living by that. It wasn't as important. Or, you know what, we undervalued this. Let's adjust that. So if we do this right, you know, we should be able to get it in good stead. And then an annual review should be pretty quick and pretty easy just to go through this. And I don't actually know what the people on the phone's background is, but, you know, if you're non-IT, and hopefully some of you are, this really needs to be a group effort. This is not just an IT area. This goes beyond IT. Of course, I've talked about the physical security and the HR policies. So this is really touches all different aspects of the organization, and people need to be trained and aware of it. So it needs to be driven and understood from a much higher level, because the impact of not going through NIST could be high. If our government work is important to us, then NIST and NIST 800-171 compliance and regular review needs to be important to us. And from an IT side, if your organization thinks that this is just an IT piece and IT needs to worry about this, and hey, you know, IT department, just kind of take care of this thing and get it done so we can check that box, that's a huge mistake. And it's incumbent upon us in IT to really bubble up and really, you know, ring the bell and say, guys, this is much more important than that. It's organizational wide, and IT can lead the charge, but we're going to need other groups to participate, because this can't just be done within the IT sphere. And the security assessment and ongoing assessment, I think, really bears that out. And our last, slide too fast. The last part of the protect section of the NIST is really system and communication protection. So 16 controls in this family and 54 methods to address those requirements that we've discovered. And this is really all about protecting communication, not only communication that leaves the organization within emails, but also communication within the organization. So our controlled unclassified information needs to be limited to needed personnel and areas only, which isn't just the external organizational boundary, right? So within certain organizations and a number of the organizations we work with, not everybody needs access to CUI, or not everyone needs access to all the CUI. So how are we limiting that within the organization, right? The old days where it's like, hey, you know, if you have access to our network, you have access to everything, those days are long gone. So what are we doing to control that? And how are we making sure that that's happening, right? And basic things, do we have a wireless guest network besides just the staff network? And are we making sure that our staff is aware that they can't just give out the staff network password on the wireless if the guest isn't working and they're like, oh, here, just use this one? Like that can't be done, right? So are we controlling that? Do we have policies in place to regularly change those wireless passwords, right? That's critically important, especially if people are leaving our organization, right? Are we doing things where we can maybe use certificates to avoid it just being the passwords? That's a little technical, but there are ways to do that, right? To changing those wireless passwords, keeping an eye on that. Are we doing minor stuff like screen lockouts and connection timeouts, right? So, an important thing is if I'm not touching my computer in 10 minutes, does the screen lock so that if I've got CUI on my screen, it's not just out there for anybody to see or walk over, by the way, more importantly, and start using my computer as me, right? That would be a big no-no in this case. So are we doing that? If we have people connected remotely, do we have it set up so that their connection times out after a certain period of inactivity so that we don't have these connections to the outside world that are initially authorized that are being used inappropriately, right? So there's nothing really crazy, I don't think, within this system, but stuff we need to do. And I'll give you a live example that we've seen that ended up being more of an embarrassment than anything, but I think illustrates the point, which is, most cases we allow staff or certain staff to be able to put email on their phone. And in most cases, we don't limit the setup. So we figure, hey, we set up an email on their phone, they're good to go. Well, we had an incident where someone decided that they also wanted to have it on an iPad. So they put their email on their iPad. This happened to be an iPad that their children used, and their 5-year-old was inside their email sending emails to their contacts, clearly unauthorized, and luckily didn't send anything or whatever that was damaging, but obviously certainly embarrassing. And I think something we'd like to avoid. So what are we doing to make sure that if people are adding remote devices to getting email, that we're limiting that people can't just sort of take their own wherewithal and extend the permissions we've given them to other devices, right? So just making sure we've got that system communication and protection in place. I think, again, IT best practice, but certainly a critical part of NIST 800, 171. All right, so detection. So we've talked a lot about protection, and as you can see, NIST is heavily focused on protection. Remember, NIST isn't really about protecting your business, about protecting the controlled unclassified information the government cares about. And there's a heavy focus on protection, and I think that that's appropriate. But we do need to remember that that's not all that's there. So what do we got? So we have detect. The first one is audit and accountability. This is going to be critical. 9 controls in here, 39 methods to address those 9 controls. And so what are we doing? So we're creating and retaining system audit records, making sure that we have those so that we can have not just the paper logs, we've got to keep those, but also within the system itself. And so we need to evaluate what is an appropriate amount of system logs that we want to keep. And we should document that as part of our plan within NIST. And how is that going to meet our requirements, right? We're going to need, this is probably going to need some requirement in a technical system, because the idea that your IT person or some person is going to look at the logs on a weekly, monthly basis is just really not going to work. This needs to be beyond just say your like server logs, but it's going to have to go into looking at ways to spot interesting behavior within the network that can happen. So we want to monitor logs on our switches and our firewalls and our wireless access points and all those different stuff to try and create a baseline, and then look at suspicious activity that would show potentially a breach, right? So we make sure that we don't have a breach for months. We want to be able to detect it early. And so this audit and accountability is all about kind of going through those systems and making sure that they're in place. So this is a very technical step, but it's a critical step, and it's really going to rely on the protection systems being in place, but we need to have it there so that we can be alerted to potential problems and go in there and take care of them as need be. Risk assessment. So there's 3 controls and 20 methods in here. Pretty straightforward. We just need to perform regular risk assessments, including some vulnerability scans. Those vulnerability scans should be performed inside the network, not just from outside in, right? So they should be performed inside the network, not just sort of pen testing from the outside in, but what are we doing inside to make sure that people can't get from one system to another? As I mentioned before, the chance of preventing 100% of what's out there is 0. So we want to make sure that we have our detection game tight and we're assessing our risks so we know where they are. And then the final detection one is system information and integrity, 7 controls and 15 methods on this. And we just want to make sure that we've got, this is pretty straightforward, antivirus, anti-malware stuff, as well as monitoring network traffic to try and detect attacks in indication of attacks, right? So if we see a big surge of information leaving our network or coming into the network, that could indicate that there's a problem. This should also talks about identifying unauthorized use of systems. And so again, heavily relying on technical systems to do so, but very important to make sure that we're detecting things. And finally, we have our recovery, which NIST only gives us one small area, 3 controls inside of this one and 16 methods, so it's small. Again, they're more concerned about us not losing the data they care about than they are about protecting our business. So this is really about coming up with an incident response plan, right? So, what's going on with our incident response plan, who's assigned to it, what is their role, and then the critical component here is testing. Are we testing that incident response plan, which in my mind includes, disaster recovery and business continuity? Do we do an annual DR test? Do we meet with our incident response team and make sure everyone knows their roles? If someone leaves, is that role reassigned? Kind of running through the process of communicating what would happen. Are we reporting it to the FBI when it happens, which we should, by the way. There's an online portal to do that. And I think from a broader IT standpoint, I think it would be important here to look at what insurance do we have and what kind of legal contracts do we have to make sure that if we need to respond to an incident, that any vendors we have their ability to be accountable and that they are going to indemnify us against their mistakes. Just from a business standpoint, I think there's a lot that could be done here that NIST doesn't require, but again, that a smart business should be doing, because it's not really a matter of if we're going to be breached, it's a matter of when. So let's make sure that we can detect it, limit it, and that we've got an incident response plan that doesn't just protect us against getting our systems back online, but also thinks about the viability of the business and what the business would do. And I think insurance and making sure we have good legal contracts with any of our partners and vendors is critically important. So that's it. I know I raced through the end there, but I realized I was kind of running a little bit short on time. Thank you all so much for attending. I know we only have 2 minutes left. I'm happy to answer any questions. If anyone has a very specific NIST 800-171 implementation practice question they want to ask, I'm happy to answer it. I do have a little time. I can stay a little late, but I will open the floor to questions. So Lisa, if you want to run that, we can do it.
Yeah, we do have a question.
Sure.
I'm gonna, it's a little bit mixed up, so
Okay.
bear with me. The person asked that you mentioned methodologies associated with NIST SP 800-171 standards. Can you give some examples and how you determined what the methods are?
Can I give some examples and what the methods are? Could I get some? I'm not sure I 100% follow the question, to be honest.
Yeah.
I can, honestly, we can. I can, if you get that person's contact info or whatever, and they want to clarify it, I'm happy to, on email, follow it up, or even spend a couple minutes on the phone. I mean,
okay.
I think that
we have somebody else coming in and saying, like, what is a method for a non-IT person to understand? And then they came back and said, you said risk assessment, there are 3 controls and 20 methods.
Got it.
That's the clarification.
Oh, so what are those, like, what are the individual 20 methods to go about doing a risk assessment and all that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just some clarification of what a method is.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think, so methods are just the processes or the checkpoints that you'd want to go through to make sure that you're doing it. So like I can probably send over an email. Some of those methods might be an easier way to do it, but let me, so don't always remember these, there's a lot of them, right? Over 200, so it's hard to remember off the top of my head. So we do have them sort of documented. So I was going to see if I can quickly pull it up. So like on a risk assessment, for instance, let's see what some of these methods are. So like, let me email that, because I'm just like getting a little bit distracted on the phone. But I think that there's a number, when you're going through a risk assessment, we just have like a checklist of things that you want to go through, right? Like, so do you have a risk management plan, right, that governs how risk is managed across the enterprise? And are we documenting any changes to how we're managing those risks? Or do we have a patch management program, right? And how are we managing, like, so security patches would be a big deal, right? So how are we managing our security patches to make sure that we are avoiding being unpatched, and therefore having risks exposed. So what's the management program? How are we verifying that we're patching appropriately? So those are like some of the methodologies that we would go through to say, are we doing an appropriate risk assessment? So I mean, they're in my mind non-IT risk assessments of IT systems. Like in that case, I mean, NIST 800-171 is technical. So if I'm left the impression that it's not technical, then I think that's probably not, that was a mistake on my end. I was just saying that going through and making sure that things are being done is what a risk assessment's about. But it's evaluating, are we doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, right? Do we have the tools in place? Are we, in the risk assessment, are we logging things, right? Are logging entry to the building, logging entry, to our security room. So, to me, the risk assessment is looking at where our risks are and what we're doing to mitigate those risks, and are we actually executing on those? Did that answer the question at all?
Right.
Sorry.
Is there a checklist that you routinely use for the 14 families when you have your, let's say in risk assessment, use as an example, the 3 controls and the 20 methods? Do you have a checklist that you go by when you go in and do an assessment?
Yeah, we do have a checklist. We do have a checklist that we use to kind of go through and look through all this stuff. Absolutely.
Because I think that it's the checklist that they would find very helpful.
Okay.
So for the layperson to look at the checklist and say, oh, okay, I've got that, I understand that, and we can't do that, we need help with that type of thing.
Sure.
So if you have a checklist that you could share, that would be great for the group.
Yeah, I think I can do that.
Okay.
Let me. We sort of like developed it, so it's. Let me figure out how I can get the checklist out, but I absolutely can. I will endeavor to do that, and I'll get that to Lisa, or you can send it to the group, Lisa.
All right. So, well, thank you very much, Ari. That was the last of the questions. That was a very comprehensive presentation, and it's greatly appreciated. I'll email a copy of the presentation to any participant who requests it by email to me, L. Wood, at sector.org. And also, Ari, once you put together a checklist, and then I will email that as well. So thank you all very much for participating, especially you, Ari. And thank you for those of you in the audience who took the time to listen to Ari's presentation. We want to get this message out to as many people as possible so that you don't miss any opportunities with the Department of Defense. So thank you very much for attending, and enjoy your day.